Hey everyone, welcome to this week's episode of SDRescue. I'm Austin Fuller, and I am joined once again by copywriter extraordinaire Grayson Fulbright. Grayson, how's it going today?
I'm doing pretty well. I'm excited to tackle this email.
Yeah, this is a really good email. So Grayson's done the rewrite this week, and he's done a great job. Today we're going to talk about an email that does so, at least how I read it anyway. Grayson may have differing opinions, but from the way I view it, is it does an okay job telling a story, but falls flat. It's, at least for me, succumbs to the temptation of starting to talk about your product or your service too soon, which ultimately spoiled the conversion for me personally when I received the email. And Grayson's gonna definitely touch on, he actually, it's a 2 for Monday today. He has 2 different rewrites, and he's going to show us how to story tell in a compelling way.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think the lesson we'll be learning today is kind of about storytelling specifically, and then how storytelling goes when you're talking about a product that you want to sell. I think when you're telling stories and you're trying to also place your product, you got to do it carefully, and kind of see it like playing poker. You don't want to show everyone your cards too early if you've got a great story and a wonderful outcome that you can share with your product. So we'll kind of dive into that as we go through the original and then move on to the rewrites.
Hey, I actually really like that. I want to stick with that analogy because before I jump into sharing the doc, just so if you're playing a game of like hearts, for example, if you ever played hearts, you can be dealt a hand. So if you can be dealt a hand that may or may not look good, but it's all about the order in which you play the cards and when you play them, right? You don't really know how good your hand. I mean, statistically, there are better hands than others, but contextually, even bad hands can be really good if played in the right order. And it's all about doing that, making those decisions. So for somebody who likes Saturday night card games, not showing your cards, knowing when to play certain cards, knowing when not to play others is really important. I really like that analogy. I'm going to steal that. So don't copyright it.
Well, this show's about stealing, so.
Yes. Okay. Before we go any further, do we see a Google Doc on the screen?
We see a Google Doc on the screen. We're good to go.
All right. It's not a black screensaver. Good. That means I'm sharing the right screen this week. All right. So I'll go ahead and read this email. So this is obviously this is an email I received. It's addressed to me. It says, "Hi, Austin. Last year, this customer's business development leaders kicked off a project to modernize their organization. They wanted to build a repeatable revenue machine, but at the time couldn't clearly measure performance. They were also dealing with a broken funnel and were trying to figure out which levers they could press to create some predictability in the business. It was a challenge. They partnered with us to see how we could help them get more aligned to their target prospects. It meant transforming the way they were used to doing business, but they had the vision to get it done. When they selected our product, they had 3 criteria. 1, visibility, better data to hold teams accountable. 2, consistency, enforce the best behaviors at scale. 3, velocity, faster and more predictable attainment. Read how this customer deployed our product and achieved 100% and 115% attainment in their first 2 quarters, respectively." And that's a hyperlink for those who don't know why it's underlined. This was a hyperlink to a case study. All right, Grayson, you want to walk us through the color coding here? I'll let you start and discuss the email because we've heard kind of my synopsis and my reception of it already in the intro.
Yeah. Okay. So I think this is not a bad email. First off, Austin, when he brought this to me to put on the show, he mentioned that this was really close, and I agree. If you look at the color coding, what basically is going on here is they're trying to tell a story and kind of paint this vision that one of their customers wanted to get to. And then the rest of that story is really about the challenges of why they couldn't, and then the things that they needed to kind of get through with the partnership they're talking about to get to this future vision that they've painted. And so I think they did a good job in terms of best practices of, have a future state that you can, use to incentivize prospects to respond. mention some pain points so that you can really resonate and also show your authority as someone who knows what they're talking about and can relate to their situation. And I think in terms of how they talk about their product, there are some tweaks that could be made, but overall it was presented well within the story. And so there were a lot of good things going on here. I think the big feedback for me for this email is too much story, too much details, and kind of like you said, as you read the email, it slowly becomes more and more obvious that they're really trying to just persuade you to talk about this product with them. And so my advice would be hold your cards. If you have a great story, you can make an entire sequence, an entire cadence of emails and calls around that story and just draw it out. Find the most valuable pieces and why they'd want to listen to the story, why they'd want to talk about the story, and focus on the story itself. I think one of the mistakes that this email makes, and I kind of make as well, because I'm trying to, in my rewrites, I tried to assume that this is like a salesperson trying to get a meeting or trying to get a response. But placing the product in a story can be risky, because I can send 3 emails that get high open rates and everyone's really engaged and I can start a lot of great conversations. But the moment I start mentioning products and the moment I start mentioning like a sales process in the future that they have to run into, that can really steer people away from engaging with you. So that's just some top line feedback that I'd start with here.
Yeah, and I think it's because people have this disconnect a little bit into understanding how buyers buy a little bit. Whereas when you're cold prospecting, I mean, you're used to. So here's part of the challenge. When you're cold prospecting, you do a ton of activities, and a lot of the times you're getting a very small percentage of people to come into the process, right? And they typically are looking for your solution because you're probably not an expert copywriter like Grayson, and you don't understand that it's not that there's a whole bunch of people that aren't in market that wouldn't talk to you. It's that you're going about the wrong process of getting people who are out of market into market, right? So that's the challenge. Is it's always the temptation for us as salespeople or SDRs or even marketing is assuming that someone's further along the journey than they are. And I'll tell you what, when I read this just now, when I reread it, I was like, oh yeah, they throw out 3 or 4 problems that prospect had, the case study had. And I was like, I would want to, if I were engineering this sequence, of emails, I would make each of those an email, or maybe 2 if the problem's big enough, if the story is, if there's enough detail. I think this email falls into temptation similar to the other storytelling one we did, where it was kind of a goofy, gimmicky story, where they try to tell too much story in one email. And look, it's not too long. I mean, I'm sure if we did character count, it's above the number of words that you need. But what I mean is it doesn't bore me. It's just you don't get deep enough into each of those problems. You try to say, hey, here's their problems that they had. But the problem is trying to cover so much ground with all those problems is you don't get detailed enough to where I actually feel like it's relevant and like we could have a conversation that's worth having. For me, at least as a leader and decision maker. So that's my read on it, right? Where, and then when you get to the 1, 2, and 3, I just don't feel like they start, that's where it starts to change into a product pitch. And the reason I didn't click on the link to go read the case study is because I felt like, and maybe all the things that I want are actually in that case study, and I didn't click on it. But when it came time to click, I felt like the copy had started to move towards a product pitch. And so the veil got thinner, right? Like it was a really well-veiled product pitch at the beginning. It was actually a story. It wasn't a product pitch. But then at the end, I started to see that product pitch shine through, and I was like, oh, this is a bait and switch. This is a trap, right? So I bailed out on clicking. And that's just the thought process.
Yeah, and I think some feedback on the CTA, because one thing that Austin mentioned to me is this is an email trying to get someone to start in a sales process. They're going to click through and check out a case study, but it was from a newsletter. And so here's my reasoning why I think if you are going to send a newsletter, even if you're going to link it, you shouldn't do what this company did. And the reason why is because today's ESPs and ISPs, which is internet service providers and email service providers, they have very sophisticated algorithms and spam filters that nowadays, like just engagement alone can have them categorize and start scrutinizing your emails more. And so if you get responses in addition to click-throughs in a newsletter or in a customer database that you're targeting, it's going to help your sender reputation a lot more than just always having that standard underlined big link, which, by the way, like linking too much text can also be a red flag for spam filters. And so I would say, even if you're sending a newsletter, if it's designed to try to get that audience to respond to you, if you're trying to actually get them to a next step, which in this case is trying to get them to either start a conversation about that product, which is the most ideal, or check out and click through on that case study, try to be a little bit more creative in how you end newsletters, because I think there's a lot of missing opportunity for today's newsletters because they all format it from back in the day, you know, the 2010s, when it had a pretty picture and a couple of sections with their blog posts, and that was it. And nowadays people are sending really targeted messaging and really targeted newsletters to really targeted audiences. And so I would actually make the argument that it's time to start testing actual CTAs in newsletters in addition to links, because not only will it hopefully generate more opportunities for you, I think it's going to help your sender reputation as an email sender.
It's a good point. It's a good point. Do you have other parts you want to add on the color code? I mean, I think that's a good stopping point for here. We can move into the rewrite.
Yeah, no, I think that's good. Just try to trim down the story. And I think that's what I did in the rewrite, was try to hold back some of my cards, get to the point, and then focus on, like I just said, the next step that I really want them to take. Because reading is one thing, taking action is another.
Yeah, that's the difference between like just being succinct and writing good copy. Right? Anyone can be succinct and have it be short enough to be read, but does anyone do anything after they read it? All right, 2 rewrites today. So storyline transition, it's much shorter. So yeah, anyone in the audience, feel free to we'll make this available so that you all can steal these templates and rewrites that Grayson makes. So hi, Austin. Our customer sales leaders kicked off a project last year to create more predictable sales outcomes, but struggled to clearly measure performance while dealing with a broken funnel. After deploying our product, this customer achieved 107% average quota attainment for 2 consecutive quarters. I'm hoping to share how our company helped generate those outcomes. Can I follow up with a link or summary of the customer's experience? Do you want to talk about each rewrite separately? I think probably a good idea.
Sure, yeah, but I can go ahead and read the direct transition as well to give you a little break here. So this is the second version I made, and really the difference between the two is one of them I'm transitioning to my call to action with the story, and the second one I'm being a little bit more upfront and just trying to get them to that next step. So second rewrite goes, hey, Austin, our customer sales leaders kicked off a project last year to create more predictable sales outcomes, but struggled to clearly measure performance while dealing with a broken funnel. I'm hoping to show you how this customer achieved 107% average quota attainment for 2 consecutive quarters after deploying this product. Can I follow up with a link or summary of this customer's experiences?
Great. All right. So both of the emails obviously got a lot shorter. But what I like in the first one especially is, so first off, I believe you copied and pasted the front part verbatim. Is that right?
I used a lot of the core pieces.
There was a lot. Yeah. Okay. I don't think it was verbatim, but you're right. You did make it more succinct, but there's a lot of things in here that are exactly the same as the above email that we rewrote. So first off, I think, yeah, I mean, when you trim that out, there's a lot less story, but it at least articulates the story much clearer. I mean, it gets the same point across, right? You had clear, they want to create more predictable sales outcomes, but struggled to clearly measure performance while dealing with a broken funnel. So I think this does, so at least when I read it, it's at least more relevant because it says, hey, the problem is they wanted to create something predictable, but their problems with that were this and this. They had a broken funnel and clearly measure performance. And then you talk about so why don't you talk about that a little bit? Why is it that you go right into the results right after you describe the problems?
So that's keeping in mind, again, that I was trying to have the point of view of a salesperson before we
Oh
got
yeah,
on the
yeah, yeah.
show.
No. Yeah, this is a prospecting email.
Yeah. And so when you're using a story, you have to, get to the point quickly. You don't want to kind of draw on with a story because unfortunately, unless it's your persona that you're targeting that likes to read a lot of long form text, they like to dive into paragraphs. Generally, you need to quickly make the story relevant and then move on to why you're sharing the story. Because really, there is a chance some people might read this and say, all right, like, who is this company? Why should I care about what their sales leaders are doing, right? So there's always going to be the chance for skepticism when you're bringing about a story, because you have to answer the question, like, why are you reaching out to me to share this? And so I usually will try to bring up something like a cliffhanger, right? And in this case, since we're trying to sell a product, I'm trying to reveal the results that we were able to bring, because the future vision that they want was more predictable sales outcomes. Well, I tie that into me trying to pitch the story and me trying to pitch our product by saying, hey, they wanted predictable sales outcomes. After they use this, they got it. I'm hoping to share how. And so the way that I try to structure it is trying to get them to continue reading to the next piece so that they can understand and then take action on that CTA. Because I feel like if I didn't, I could have just said the first line there and just said, hey, this customer sales leaders wanting to do this, but struggled with this and this. Can I follow up with a link or summary of this person's experiences? You could do that and you might get some click-throughs, you might get some conversations, but there's something missing there, right? There's a little bit missing about like, okay, why does this matter? Like, what's the point of this story? And so even if it's not results, it's good to tie in something that can get them to say like, okay, that's interesting. I'd like to learn more about that story.
Yeah, and I think that's good because if you hold back the how, so this is an important thing to understand, and like I talked about a little bit in the beginning, people have a disconnect between how somebody goes from cold to not knowing you to being in market, right? Because most of the time prospecting efforts are just send out a bunch of emails and make a bunch of phone calls and try and get in touch with as many people, in market people as possible. And you have a minority that do and respond and get into the funnel and as results. Otherwise, you kind of just end up drawing in curious people who just want to kind of window shop, right? If you don't do it right. At least that's what I found, is that if you just go about trying to gather the low-hanging fruit, all you do is you bring in curious window shoppers that aren't actually in market. And you get a lot of that, and you have to sift through a lot of those things. But if you do it this way, so like if this is the first email you receive or somewhere in the beginning stages, you begin to educate the buyer, like you've held back the how, but it's not because the how is a product pitch. The how is actually how they did it. So I mean, this is a little bit where the content has to help there. Your case study has to actually teach them something. But this is important. It doesn't matter if the case study is incredible and teaches them exactly how to fix their problem if they don't reply to this email and get it, right? So the email, it's two sides of the coin, where if you're sending them this email is compelling. It makes me want to reply because I go, okay, this person had a problem or a struggle that's similar. It might not be exactly the same, but it's like one I have, and they had results, and you want to tell me the story of how they did that. And then I can educate myself on, oh, this is one of the ways that I could attempt to solve it. And that's just one step in moving me from out of market to in market, down from being cold to being hot. So I like it.
Yeah. And I think you can make the argument too that, this could be an email that's placed in many different parts of the sales process.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be the first one in a sequence.
I've said this before on other episodes, but I tend to use these types of emails actually, like wherever I'm like either bringing some sort of testimonial or like trying to showcase some sort of outcome I brought for a client or for a customer. I tend to actually use those in the later steps of the process, like after discovery, to try to keep momentum going and try to like really build confidence as they're, sharing resources and documents with their team. But I do think, like, you do make a good point. Like, even though I have that opinion, this could very well be a very good step on email because it does accomplish the outcome of building immediate authority. Because it's very, very rare that you're going to have companies on the whole sharing stories up front about outcomes they brought to customers. There's a reason why social proof is such a big deal. If every company was just throwing around logos all over the place, it'd be a lot less important. But the fact of the matter is, it's kind of hard to bring an outcome to to a client that's worthy of showing off, and then getting them enough confidence and having a working relationship that's successful enough to where they agree to like let you use that story. So already that's a lot of clout right off the bat for an email. So I think you make a good argument that this could be a step 1, this could be a step 5, or it could be post discovery. Like I'd probably use it.
Yeah. I mean, I think so. I mean, I just think that like as salespeople, we need to learn. I don't want to get too philosophical, but just if we understand, especially if you're in a sales geo territory environment where you have a plot of ground assigned to you and you can't sell anything outside of that plot, then you've got to know how to take all the people living there that aren't in market and how to educate them and move them towards market. And you can't tell them how to do it, right? I mean, you can, it's just not going to be very effective. But if you can send an email like this, I mean, you would want to rewrite the first part just so if it was a very first email, so you start your introduction off at least on the right foot, in my opinion. Like you want to be a little more cordial. But if you've emailed this person a couple of times, or you've met them at an industry event or anything, right? And you need to send them something to move them towards in market. This is either of these rewrites are great pieces to deliver education, to move someone towards thinking about a problem. And that's what you want. You want someone evaluating themselves, rethinking the problems they have, because as they do that, they'll have questions and they'll reply, they'll want to meet with you. And look, you may not get to BANT them or medic them in that first initial meeting, but maybe you discover a little bit and they're a little too early. Okay. And then you have another one a week or two or a month later. You know what I mean? It's a process. And I think, the problem is we have quotas to chase. And so we can only spend our effort on, the people who are buying now and this month and this quarter, but hopefully you can manage the process and manage the territory to where you are nurturing these people from being out of market to being in market buyers. And I think this email is a great way to do that. You could do it with a variety of content. It doesn't necessarily have to be a case study of a customer, but an email with a similar format like this with content that moves the buyer forward in the sales process would work. You could just change a couple of words to make it fit that content, and it would be this format would work.
Yeah, I agree. And I think there's a lot to be said too about the value itself of just reading this story, because it's important to know that we're over here talking about the perspective of a salesperson that's sending this with the goal of trying to get some sort of sales conversation. But you could just as easily strip all of the product language out and just like it. You said that you got this as a newsletter. Well, if you have a targeted audience of people that are really interested in the content that you're sharing with then you could just share the story itself. Like, don't worry about forming it as a case study. Maybe you can mention that, or maybe you can say that on the landing page when they click. But really, I think there's a lot of value in just saying, hey, a sales leader, which is the right persona, because that's who you are, Austin. A sales leader kicked off a project to hit a future vision that you'd probably be interested in. They struggled with this and this, and then just say, hey, I wanted to share a story about how this company managed to like really hit those goals, do this % quota attainment for 2 consecutive quarters. Would you be interested in checking it out? I think like if you take the sales pressure out, I think that could be another really interesting angle. And if you have a lot of ammo, you could do a cadence of just sharing these stories. And when people click through, they learn about your brand. They might get into a conversation. Maybe they'll follow up and ask how they did it. Maybe they'll follow up and say, hey, do you have any other content? Or do you know of anybody who can help me with this or that? I think salespeople and the sales world in general, to me, tends to put too much value on the call. And I really wish that more salespeople put a focus on just creating positive interactions that are relevant to the sales process. So even if they're not talking to you about your product, even if they're not talking to you about your brand, if a buyer that's qualified is willing to give their time to talk about a story that you can share that's relevant for them, that's building rapport. That's staging for a future sale. And so I think people shouldn't like look over all these little opportunities for engagement that you'll get in a campaign. If you go straight for a call each time, you really, really shrink the amount of people who are actually willing to engage with you.
Yeah, that's important. And for me as a sales leader, I mean, that's what I spend my time doing, right? Is testing, measuring, figuring out what are that's why people look at sales engagement platforms and they just think that they're mass email dial platforms. And that's really not at all what they're intended for. If you're a power user of those things, you can actually look and measure and analyze what behaviors start conversations. And then what you do is you replicate and over index on doing those behaviors in other, it could be based on vertical, it could be based on territory, it could be, there's a lot of lenses to look at it through. But if you're a solo salesperson and you're responsible, or a business owner, or you're doing your own sequences, or you're an SDR, then it's important to actually look at your sequence and say, hey, am I asking for a meeting every time? Am I trying to just get this person to do a sales meeting each step? Or do I have deliberate steps to offer other experiences to the prospect outside of just meeting with me for me to qualify them? Because ultimately, if you do provide those experiences, like this one is, reading about a similar customer that has results to a problem they want to solve. If you have a bunch of those experiences, the meetings are going to come naturally. Those are going to be a side effect of good buyer experience and good education on the side of the prospect.
Yeah, I think that's a really good takeaway to kind of cap off today's show, is that it should be, if you're targeting the right people and you're using the right messaging, and then the big third one is that you understand the timing of your space, you should naturally generate opportunities for a sales conversation just by staying in touch and being top of mind. That's big advice I've always taken as I've kind of learned both on the marketing side and as a seller, the idea of staying top of mind, because the reality is most people in your market won't be immediately feeling the pain or looking for a solution whenever you reach out to them. And so what's more important is not trying to just shove everyone else out of the way and narrow target on the end markets. They're valuable, yeah, but what's better is to actually learn how can you interact with this entire audience, knowing that it's hard to guess what stage they're in, and actually get them to interact with you regardless. I think that is a really good takeaway, Austin. And I think if more sales teams were able to actually do that, like master how they interact with their audience regardless of stage, I think quota attainment wouldn't be such an issue. It'd be a lot easier, a lot more conversations floating around.
I agree. Well, I think that's time. I think it's time to wrap up for today. Let's see. Go ahead so remember, we would love to evaluate your emails. If you have emails that you send or emails that you get, please connect with Grayson and I on LinkedIn. We are very happy to rewrite your emails for you. I mean, Grayson's a copywriting expert here. And I'm a sales leader, so we'd love to do that. Also, you can check out, we'll find a way to deliver these templates. I know we were thinking about putting an ebook together of lessons learned from cold emails in the past year. So we'll look at doing that. And there's a ton of other resources at SDRevolution.com, and you can follow the page on LinkedIn or go directly to the website, SDRevolution.com for more of those things. And I think with that, we'll see you all next week. Same time, same place.
Awesome. Thanks everybody for joining us.